Great. Well, I think at this point we'll go ahead and get started. And if anyone else joins us, obviously they can just hop on late, but appreciate you all making the time. So just to start off, obviously welcome everyone. I think I've met most of you at this point, but just again, my name is Jessica Hernandez and I'm the Director of Operations at Supply Bank. So I'm responsible for our warehousing, logistics, and procurement. So those are really the topics that I've been handling as part of our training and technical assistance with ACF and you all. So as you may have seen upon entering today's training, the session is being recorded and will be posted on ACF's website within the next 2 weeks. They have been a bit faster than that with the recent trainings, but just go ahead and let's say 2 weeks just to be safe. Feel free to drop any questions in the chat as we go. We'll also have an opportunity for questions throughout the presentation. So with that, today's agenda. We're going to be running through a lot of topics today, both related to the RFP process and how to select a vendor. So keep in mind that what we're going through is really best practice recommendations, but your organization or perhaps your state, depending upon the type of organization you are, may already have a process identified that you have to work within. So if that's the case, we recommend that you review that process separately just to see how it aligns with what we discussed today. Additionally, just that, this is a lot of information and a lot of steps. And again, depending upon your organization, you may or may not have the staff, the time, the manpower to implement all of this. So kind of as we're going through this information, perhaps think about, what could you do to enhance your current process using one of these steps if you're not able to fully implement everything from start to finish given your own constraints. So just to kind of run through, we're going to do an overview, talk about the different steps of an RFP process. So aligning on scope, research and engage, developing your actual RFP, implementing that RFP, doing financial due diligence, product testing, social audit, finally getting to the selection of your vendor, formalizing the relationship, and then ongoing relationship maintenance. So with that, we're going to start off with a request for proposal or quote overview. So you may hear both the terms RFP and RFQ thrown around. These are two different ways of which going about requesting information from a potential vendor or manufacturer. So an RFP, that's a request for proposal. It is more broad and leaves room for more information or interpretation. It's typically a longer narrative format in addition to pricing. And so this kind of gives more opportunity for your vendor or manufacturer to come back with new ideas or new approaches and explain really how they might be able to help enhance your business. It also, in addition to pricing, kind of just gives an opportunity for more creativity and the opportunity for them to kind of sell themselves to you as to how beyond pricing, we might be a little bit higher in price, but here's everything else we offer in addition to that price. Then the other alternative is an RFQ. So this is just a request for quote. This is much more direct. This is typically focused specifically on pricing. You're typically only really looking at a few pages of content with an RFQ. We're mostly going to be talking about an RFP process, so that request for proposal today. If your organization really knows what you want and know which vendors out there are going to give you what you want, an RFQ may make more sense for you. Just because with that, you're really just focused on the bottom line pricing and not so interested in kind of, perhaps the broader picture, what other options or services a vendor might be able to offer you. With that, kind of, the difference between an RFP and an RFQ. So, an RFP, you're going to learn more information about your prospective vendors. So, if you haven't had an opportunity to engage with these people a ton, gives you an opportunity to kind of understand their fuller scope and how their goods and services could potentially fit into their program. Again, an RFQ really is just about pricing. So you're really just looking for that quote and wanting to understand the bottom line and how that fits within your budget. You'll still receive all of that pricing information with an RFP, and going through the proposal process, you'll kind of just get some added information. So again, we're really going to be focusing on the RFP part as opposed to an RFQ with what we're talking about today. But before we move on, I just wanted to see if anyone on the call has actually been through an RFP or an RFQ process before, and maybe if you'd care to share a little bit about, how that went for you or what your experience was. And so feel free to drop that in the chat or come off mute. I'll also say that if the answer is no, that's completely fine. This is kind of a time-intensive process, and unless it's your sole job, it maybe is not something that everyone's done at this point. Exactly. Yeah, we've already got a no. Completely understandable. Great. So we'll kind of move on to our next point then. So first thing that you're going to be doing before you even are reaching out to potential vendors, before you're even writing anything, is you're going to want to align on your scope. So what does that mean? This is understanding both your organization's needs and the needs of your stakeholders. And so typically, when you're talking or thinking about your scope, you're not only thinking about what you need internally, but also how are you serving your broader community. So with that, you need to be thinking about what are the needs of the organization. Are we just looking for products for our programs? Are you just looking for diapers? Or do we need broader services? Are you looking for someone that's also providing wipes, also providing diaper rash cream, also potentially doing deliveries? So kind of thinking about what all of that looks like. Thinking about who your stakeholders are, both internally and externally. So, what departments in your organization need to be involved in this decision-making process? Do you need your finance department involved? Do you need your programs department involved? Do you need your comms department involved? Who needs to be involved in this? And then who are your stakeholders externally? So who are the organizations that you're providing diapers to? Are you looking to just be, potentially having their staff involved in this process, or are you potentially thinking about having families and others involved in kind of selection of materials and what diapers you're providing? And then kind of finally, are you looking for the a kind of an off-the-shelf product? So, a Huggies, a Pampers, a Loves, a known quantity, known identifiable brand to your families? Or perhaps you thinking a bit longer term and wanting to be able to have a brand that is, branded and specifically for your organization and might be manufactured by one of those organizations or another, but doesn't say that brand on it, but says your organization's name. So these questions and others are kind of what you need to think about when determining the scope for your RFP and really using this information to kind of guide who's involved in the process and who you're looking for as your potential vendors. So next up, we actually do start our vendor outreach. So we're starting our research and engagement. So for research, you're researching the products that are on the market to understand what you're looking for. You're also then surveying your partners and participants to understand their needs. So you're kind of, getting a broader idea from those stakeholders about what the needs are. What sizes of diapers are we looking for? Are we looking also for wipes, diaper rash cream? Are we doing tote bags to provide them to families? What are the larger needs related to this project? Researching in-store price points to kind of have a broader understanding of expected pricing, but also knowing that you're more than likely going to be able to negotiate better costs than the in-store price point. But at least the in-store price point gives you a starting line to understand what families are paying and then gives you an opportunity to look for cost savings. And then finally, you're going to want to look and do some research on who both your domestic and potentially international vendors are as well. We have a separate training next week on, I believe, Tuesday the 2nd, that is specifically focused on domestic versus international vendors. So I'm not going to dive too much into that topic today, just because we'll really focus on that about when you should look at domestic versus when you should look at international next week. So after you've completed your research, you move on to your engagement. So this is actually reaching out to prospective vendors to understand, what products they have that might meet your initial criteria beyond what you've potentially found from your research. It also gives you an opportunity to start to learn more about their organization and what their requirements are for you becoming a customer. So you may find that, someone's product is a really good fit for you, but you reach out to them and their minimum order quantity is 100,000 diapers per month. Well, more likely than not, most organizations in this pilot are not going to be able to meet that minimum order requirement. So at that point, it may not be the best fit depending upon what their needs are. So, you're learning about those, you're learning about lead times. So lead times is how long is it from when you place an order to the product arriving. So, some organizations might be able to turn an order around within 2 weeks. Others might need 6 weeks, depending on their production timeline. And then finally, payment terms. So, working with your finance department, you're going to be thinking about, when are we paying these people? Do we have to pay them up front? So we're paying before we've even, received product. Are we, able to get terms where we're paying, 30, 45 days after products arrive? And kind of how does that fit into our overall scope and our overall finances? So after you've done this initial research, you've aligned on your scope, you're going to actually develop your RFP. So this is, the part where you're actually writing what this is going to look like, putting this information together to send out to potential vendors. Depending upon the type of person you are and how much you enjoy writing, this could be either your least or your most favorite part of this process. Um, so with developing your RFP, this is where you're going to, define the scope, and also your budget. You're going to provide background and introductory information on your organization, and then describes the goods and services you're looking for. That way, your vendor is able to respond. You're also going to detail your selection criteria and timelines for actually going through this process. So some examples of selection criteria that we'll walk through in the coming steps are, receiving product samples, asking for customer references, doing financial due diligence, doing product testing, and then finally doing a social or environmental impact audit. So there's a lot of RFP templates out there. We're working on developing one that ACF will be posting on the website. And there's also a lot of software systems out there to help you build an RFP. So there's a lot of tools that exist in order to actually, do this work. And for some of you, like I previously mentioned, your organization, if you've already been doing procurement, might already have a template for what you're looking for with this. Also, if you're part of a city, county, or state agency, there's more than likely a process or a template that they want you working within when doing something like that. So that's definitely something to check on if you're not sure. So kind of beyond the selection criteria that I listed, does anyone on the call have ideas for what other criteria they might want to include or other, things you're thinking about as you've been looking at potential diaper vendors? So feel free to come off mute or drop those in the chat. And if the answer is also no, that's completely okay too, but just wanted to see if anyone has any creative ideas. Great. So kind of moving on to implementation. So implementation is actually taking the RFP that you've developed and sending that out to the prospective vendors. So with that, you're going to want to send it out to 3 to 5 prospective vendors. You want to keep your pool small, but also keep your options open. So keep in mind that the more vendors you send it out to, the more proposals you have to review. So you want to be strategic in terms of thinking about who's the best fit for your organization based off of the research you've previously done. With sending it out, you want to provide them a Q&A period to ask any questions they might have based on the information you've been providing. And then finally, you want to, outline a timeline for them. So the timeline for response, when they're due by, how long you think it'll take you to do the selection and actually select a vendor. And then finally, when you're looking to place your first order with the vendor selected. So, letting them know we expect this process to take 4 months or we expect this process to take 2 months, and kind of determining that when you're sending out this information. So, as we kind of talked about previously, during your scope alignment, you've likely identified some interested stakeholders. And for those interested stakeholders, kind of the way in which they potentially fit in beyond the scope alignment and the research and engage portion, there's also an opportunity here to engage them with product samples. So you could potentially have, parents, other organizations, if you have local connections to healthcare individuals that you're working with, have them come and be a part of a roundtable to actually review product samples from the organizations that you're sending your RFP out to. Um, this should be done blind without any knowledge of the brands. Obviously, someone in your organization will need to know what brands they are, but you should try to have, all those stakeholders that are participating not actually know what products they're reviewing, because you can have some bias based on brands just based off of past experience. And with this roundtable, you're going to want to be looking at qualitative and quantitative information. So with qualitative, thinking about developing a survey for the stakeholders to complete, for them to rate items on a scale of 1 to 5, for items such as a visual appeal, feel of the diapers, absorbency, elasticity of the bands, etc. Keep in mind that items such as absorbency and elasticity, while it's great to have stakeholders look at that and provide their feedback, this is also something that can be scientifically tested, and we'll discuss that a little bit later on. So while having a stakeholder, stretch out the elasticity and provide their feedback is great, it may not actually match what is really true to that brand or to that specific diaper. And then for quantitative feedback, this is, having them kind of touch, feel, and then provide feedback in a broader sense on the products. So this is having, stakeholders perhaps write down some notes about the overall experience with the products, or having a note taker throughout your session to kind of understand and capture the feedback that everyone's providing. This information should definitely all be recorded, as you'll want to use it as part of your selection for the vendor in terms of understanding, what stakeholders like and don't like about different products. So next up, we're going to be discussing, financial due diligence, product testing, and social and environmental audits. So all of these items can be included in your RFP process, and they can also be conducted simultaneously while prospective vendors are responding to your RFP. So if you're trying to speed up your timeline a bit, you can do all of these while they're actually completing and sending that information back to you. You can also wait till you receive back their proposals and then go through these steps if you want to use some of these steps to kind of help narrow your pool once you actually have those proposals back. So with financial due diligence, some kind of, basic things that we recommend that you do for domestic, obviously confirming that they have a business license and are in good standing with the Secretary of State for the state that they are incorporated in, requesting a Dun& and Bradstreet report, and then additionally requesting 3 years of audited financial statements. For international, you'll want to confirm that the country of origin and the company are not on the Office of Foreign Assets Control sanction list. So this is a sanction list from the Department of Treasury, basically of or countries and companies that entities in the United States should not do business with. Justin will drop the link to that website in the chat for those that are interested. Similarly, requesting a Dun& and Bradstreet report, depending upon where the international organization is coming from, they may or may not be participating in this. And then finally, 3 years of audited financial statements. Again, this is an area where your Department of Finance and potentially your state government may have additional requirements that they're wanting you to look at from a financial due diligence perspective. So really make sure you understand those as you're entering this process. Next, we move on to product testing. So product testing is the actual, regulatory and performance testing separate from kind of reviewing the product samples that we discussed. With both international and domestic vendors, you definitely have the opportunity to independently test your products. For some vendors, they are able to kind of provide testing documentation and provide proof that they are compliant with all of the different regulations. Depending upon the vendor and whether or not they're domestic or international, you can kind of choose to just use the information that they provide. Domestic vendors, typically, since we're looking at products from organizations that are US based, you don't necessarily need to do third-party testing. For international vendors, we would definitely recommend doing third-party testing. It's just a good due diligence step to make sure that you are really understanding the products that you're receiving and that they are meeting, all of the regulations that are outlined. So regulatory, you're going to be looking at, federal regulations, so FDA compliance if applicable, making sure that it's meeting packaging and labeling standards that are laid out by the federal government, and then at a bare minimum, testing for lead and heavy metals just to make sure that there's no other issues at hand. And then additionally, some states. So, for example, I've listed here California, New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Virginia. I think we have some of you from Virginia on the call, have specific regulations around plastic bag packaging and what needs to be on those plastic bags and how they need to be labeled. And so this is kind of where working with a testing organization, they know all of these individual state regulations and can help make sure that you're in compliance. And there's a ton of them out there. I know Washington has some, Melissa, for different pieces related to diapers and different aspects. So there's definitely a lot out there, and testing companies are able to help provide that guidance. Similarly, they're able to test for performance. So that's kind of what I mentioned earlier about testing for absorbency, elastic strength, et cetera. You can definitely look at that during your product samples, but you can also have that scientifically tested by a testing agency. So most of the audit partners that we'll discuss in a few slides also offer testing, and they can definitely, from our experience, provide recommendations on what regulatory and performance testing is needed. All of that being said, keep in mind that by doing product testing for either an international or domestic vendor, you're likely going to be paying for this yourself as opposed to the vendor paying for it. And it does add up, depending upon everything that you're looking to test, you could be looking at $3,000 to $5,000 just, to do an initial testing run. So it's definitely something to consider and keep in mind in terms of, what's best for your agency and the stakeholders you're working with, but also being fiscally responsible around what testing is needed. So next we come to the social and environmental audit. Again, this is something that can be performed for both domestic and international vendors. We highly, highly recommend it for international vendors, just because it really helps make sure that you're in line both socially and environmentally with the work that they're doing. Additionally, since, with domestic vendors, there's more of an opportunity for you potentially to visit yourself and see working conditions compared to with an international vendor, you're not going to be able to do that. And so it's really important to be relying on a third party to kind of help do that review and make sure that, you're up to compliance. So a social audit ensures that a vendor is socially responsible. It can also sometimes be called an ethical audit or a social compliance audit. So this is really looking for human rights violations, making sure that international vendors are in compliance with both local and international labor law, and that they're providing safe and hygienic working conditions for their workers. While an environmental audit is more assessing the vendor's environmental management and making sure that they're environmentally responsible. So that's kind of looking at how much air pollution they're creating, how are they managing their waste, is there any evidence of soil contamination, and then how are they kind of using their resources to produce the items that they're providing. So with that, listed here are kind of a few of the big name social and environmental audit partners. So that's SGS, TUV Sud, Intertech, and Bureau Veritas. All four of these organizations are international organizations that are working in, not only the U.S. but Central and South America, East Asia, Southeast Asia, India, kind of anywhere that you could potentially be looking to internationally source products. These four organizations offer social environmental audits. They also, for the most part, are offering testing that we kind of talked about a little bit. So you'd be able to, reach out to one of these partners and work with them to understand what they'd be able to offer you in terms of conducting these audits and providing product testing. So next we come to the fun part, the selection of your vendor. So you've collected all this information, you've received your request for proposals back from your possible vendors. Now it's time to actually assess them and make your selection. So each of your selection criteria should be assigned a point value. This allows you to effectively and fairly evaluate all the respondents and help to ensure that there's no bias. Additionally, multiple staff members should be involved in the review process to help evaluate. Again, this helps to ensure that it's done fairly and that there's no bias based off of, someone having a previous relationship or maybe favoring one vendor over another just based off of personal interactions. So with that, you're going to want to be looking at your pricing, how well they responded to the RFP brief, product testing results, social and environmental audit results, if those were conducted, and then the results from your product sample roundtable. It is kind of important to keep in mind that, there is an opportunity for bias at every point in this step because people will have their own perceived, brands that they may prefer or a vendor that they had a really good conversation with and they think that would be the best choice for the organization. So that's why it's really important to make sure that you are using a point system and having multiple staff members involved in the evaluation piece, just to make sure that you're not opening up yourself to any sort of issue or conflict of interest. So just wanted to see, has anyone on the call perhaps been a part of an RFP response review panel before, or maybe been part of the vendor selection process for their organization? And so again, feel free to come off mute or drop that in the chat if you have been. I'm going to take the silence to mean that this is all new information, which is great. And obviously it's a lot of information. So, feel free to take the time to digest it, watch the video again in the future, and also reach out to us if you have any questions or want to talk about your specific needs. So after we've selected our vendor, we're formalizing our relationship. So that is informing the vendor of their selection and, formalizing the relationship with them. So their RFP response can be used to help kind of create a contract if, your organization doesn't already have a contract template, or if the vendor that you're working with doesn't already have a template that they ask customers to work within. More likely than not, when it comes to, diapers, baby wipes, and diaper rash cream, you're likely looking at some fairly large organizations that likely have a contract template that you'll be able to work within. But it's a good idea to keep in mind that you may need to use kind of the RFP as a template to build that out if needed. So after you've selected your vendor, formalized your relationship, you then kind of have your ongoing relationship maintenance. So this is working with your vendor on a regular basis. So that's kind of providing regular forecasts and updates on your upcoming needs, scheduling check-in calls, just, these can be done. You could do them on a weekly basis if you want. You can also do them quarterly. It kind of depends on the volume of the relationship and how much product is being provided. Finally, you want to remember that this relationship is a two-way street when it comes to communication and needs. So, leaving the door open for your vendor to come to you with any questions or concerns that they may have, and really making sure that you're both communicating effectively. You'll also, as part of ongoing relationship maintenance, want to share any positive or negative feedback that you've received on their products. So kind of keeping your vendors in the loop as you receive feedback from your potential customers. And so, that's, if a family or an organization reaches out with some current concerns or questions around sizing or something like that, going back to your vendor and providing them with that feedback, not only to see what kind of response they have, but also, again, just kind of keeping that two-way street when it comes to communication. So with that, we've, done an RFP, we've done product testing, we've selected a vendor, and, we've set up our relationship and we're working with them moving forward. All of this is definitely, like I mentioned, a time consuming process. You're not going to do this overnight. You're potentially looking at 6 months to maybe even a year to go through all of this, depending upon how many staff members are involved and what capacity is. So while it's not necessarily something that you may be able to do right here and now for this pilot, it is something to think about in terms of longer term and how you can apply this as there's opportunities for additional funding and you're trying to expand and continue your programs. Also thinking about how you might be able to apply different pieces of this to your already existing process as you're working within the pilot. So with that, the rest of our time here today is for open discussion. So if you have any questions, feel free to come off mute or drop them in the chat. And Justin and I are happy to help and assist in any way possible. If you don't have any questions here today, want to sit and kind of think on this information, feel free to email Christian. Her email's in the chat. She's kind of the main point of contact for communication within our organization. She is out of the office today, which is why Justin has been assisting, but she is available to kind of schedule or get anything on the books with Justin and myself if needed. So feel free to drop her a note. So again, with that, thank you all so much. As previously mentioned, this is being recorded and will be posted for you all within the next 2 weeks on ACF's website. But we're here with any questions and happy to cover any topics or, go back to anything to help support you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Just a reminder to fill out the survey if you all get a chance. We'll follow up via email as well. It is in the chat.
Thank you so much, Justin. And if you don't have any questions, feel free to go ahead and, take the 25 minutes back and hop off the call. But Justin and I will be here for a little bit more in case there are questions.